Have you ever picked up a canter and felt unbalanced? In this video, you'll learn the meaning of canter leads and how to tell if you're on the correct one. When the horse canters, the canter is of course that 3-beat gait, and he's either going to be on the right lead or the left lead, and the lead basically just refers to the leading leg of the canter. Now, why this is important is because in order for a horse to be best balanced for a turn, he needs to be on that inside lead. So for example, if we're turning to the right, the horse needs to be cantering on the right lead in order to maintain his balance around that turn. Now, of course, there is the advanced exercise of counter canter, where the horse's balance is improved to the point where he can hold the opposite lead around a turn. But for the purpose of our course and for the purpose of general riding, we want to have the horse on the inside lead in order to have the best balance. The first obvious question is, how do we feel and how do we tell which lead our horse is on? And the easiest answer to this is that most often when a horse picks up the incorrect lead, as soon as he approaches a turn, he's either going to break back down to the trot because he's going to start to get unbalanced, or the turn is going to feel very rushed or just very unbalanced as he goes around. Now, a little cheat that you can use to tell which lead you're on, whether you're on the inside or the outside, is to glance down at the shoulder. So when you're riding, if you glance down at the horse's shoulder, you'll see the shoulder of the lead that the horse has taken moving slightly more forward. And you can even see the leading front leg sometimes coming slightly out in front of the shoulder. Now, we don't want to always rely on looking down because obviously that is affecting our balance, and it's not going to help the overall flow and consistency of our riding if we always look for our lead. But what you can do as an exercise to help you start to feel this is to pick up the canter, take a moment to glance, or if you have someone on the ground, they can just call it out to you, but take a moment to see which lead the horse is on and then really think about feeling that canter. What you'll feel is that your hips are going to basically be moving with that lead. So what I mean by that is when you're in the canter on, say, the right lead, and the right is to the inside, you're going to find that your right or your inside hip is going to be slightly forward when you're cantering on that lead in that direction. Now, if you change directions and you also pick up the canter on the left lead, you're going to feel the difference. When you're first learning to canter, it's a good idea to not worry about feeling the lead immediately, but instead just get used to the movement and the rhythm of the canter. And as your balance and your comfort and your ability to just move with the canter improves, your ability to feel the lead and tell almost instantly what lead the horse is on is going to really improve as well. The next question would be, how do we make sure that our horse picks up the correct lead? How do we cue him for the correct lead? So this one also has a few different stages. When you're first learning to canter, you're probably going to be just worrying about picking up the canter. You might not be focusing as specifically on one lead versus the other. However, very quickly, you'll learn that it's important to pick up the inside lead. So each horse might have a different cue that he's used to picking up that lead. If we have a horse correctly balanced with a slight inside bend and he's carrying his weight with the inside bending and he's carrying his weight slightly on the hind end, if we ask him with any kind of on a turn, he's going to naturally pick up that correct lead. If the horse is counterbent, or if he's balanced where it feels like his weight is going down on his inside shoulder, then he's going to be more likely to pick up an incorrect lead. So the first step to picking up the correct lead when we're cantering is to make sure that the horse is balanced, that they have a nice inside bend, and that they're soft. The next step is to teach the horse the specific cue. Most people use outside leg because as we slide back our outside leg and we move the outside leg back in order to ask for that canter, the horse will slightly move the hip in. It kind of increases the bending in the body, and they'll pick up that lead. So for example, if we move right leg back, they'll pick up the left lead and vice versa. So again, you want to start with just learning to ride the canter. Don't worry too much about the leads, except for just starting to feel that, okay, I picked up the canter, he came to the turn, it felt kind of bumpy and unbalanced, and he came to the trot, okay, wrong lead. And then you start to feel the difference between the two leads, and then you can be a little bit more precise or pay a little bit more attention to making sure that your horse is soft and supple and balanced before asking for the canter. You can ask for it with some bending and also ask for it on a turn to help get that correct lead. And then as this improves and you start putting a very specific cue to left lead canter versus right lead canter, such as the movement of your opposite leg, then you're going to be consistently getting that correct lead. Sometimes we also have to change our lead. So if we're riding and we're changing directions at the canter, depending on the pattern that we're riding, or if we're riding a jumping course and we need to change directions, we need to change our canter lead in order to maintain the balance of the horse. We can change the canter lead with either a simple or a flying change. So a simple change is going to be where the horse comes back to the trot and then canters off into the new lead. A flying change is where the horse does kind of like a skip movement, where he does a little hop and he switches his lead. Now, when we're first beginning to even think about lead changes, or when we're kind of first learning to ride the canter, you're probably going to be working on just simple changes. And the key with the simple change and with the flying change is the balance of the horse. So we want to make sure that the horse is balanced, that we do the transition down, we change the bending, and then we ask with our cue, usually that outside leg, for the new canter. Now, when you're doing a flying change, the mechanics of it are basically the same, but instead of transitioning to the trot, you're just going to half halt, change the bending, ask for the new canter lead, and get the new lead as the horse does that flying change. The key to effectively riding lead changes, whether simple or flying, is being able to maintain the balance of the horse and also to be able to maintain your balance. So just take it at whatever pace you're at. In the beginning, you might do a simple change where it takes you 10 or 15 steps to get that balance back, get organized, get the correct bending, and ask for a canter again. As you start to progress in your riding, and as you start to get more balanced and more comfortable with that sequence of movement and with that rebalancing, then this sequence is going to basically speed up. Honestly, when you ride a figure eight and you come through even at a trot or even at a walk and you're changing directions in the middle, besides that cue for the new canter, the mechanics of changing directions, rebalancing, changing bending is basically the same. So just like many other things in riding, you can actually start to practice and build your skills for lead changes, simple or flying, in the lower gaits. And if you're struggling with a lead change, the answer is usually not in doing more changes, but actually in fixing something in the lower gaits and doing some simpler exercises. Now, as far as training the horse for lead changes, there's kind of two different schools of thought. So there's some styles of riding, mostly I'll use kind of jumpers versus dressage for this example. There's some styles of riding, such as jumpers, where we want to basically just trigger the change and kind of teach the horse to have an automatic change. That when he comes into a turn, if he's not on that inside lead, he just automatically swaps to that inside lead without even necessarily having to get the cue from the rider. Now, for a dressage horse, we don't want that automatic swap. We want everything to be on the cue of the rider, and we want the horse to maintain whatever lead he's on until we ask him for the new one. Now, for myself, when I introduce flying changes to the horse, I find that I'm usually somewhere in the middle. I'm not in a big hurry to introduce it to a green horse, but I do use a lot of times like a pole on the ground to help trigger it. So I work the horse until they feel very soft, very supple, and I know that they have the strength to really use the hind end correctly, that I'm less likely to get what's called a cross canter, or when the horse only switches like up front or behind. I will work the horse so they're strong enough so that that's not as likely to happen before I start asking for the flying changes. The only danger with introducing flying changes too early is that the horse can become can become frustrated and can actually become anxious if he's pushed too much by the rider and he's not understanding what the movement is, and he can learn to rush through. So he can learn to either just rush through the change and rush through the canter without getting it and get unbalanced, or he can even learn to rush through the change and cross canter behind, or just rush through it and get really hot every time that he thinks flying lead change or that he's asked for the flying lead change. Right now, you might just be thinking about starting to feel which lead you're on, or you might be starting to think about riding changes of directions, paying a little bit more attention to the balance and the bending as your horse changes directions, and kind of riding through it in your head as if you were cantering through it and doing that simple or that flying lead change. So it's like practicing it in your head and imagining it in your head at the canter as you ride it at the trot. And then you can start to canter in and just do the simple change. And for others, you might actually be thinking about those flying changes and thinking, if you're having some trouble, what could you go back on to work on? What's getting stiff through that change that you could work on in the lower gaits? Or how could you better set up the exercise in order for your horse to get the movement? So in Stay in the Saddle, in this book, there are 67 exercises, but there's hundreds of combinations to create different training programs to plan your ride. And this is so much more than a book, because in here there's a link to a video and a full video program that comes with this, so that you can see, just like we did here, a little demonstration and some troubleshooting for each one of the exercises. There's a link down below where you can learn more about the book, get the details, and get a copy of the book and everything that comes with it for yourself. So thank you so much for watching, and as always, enjoy the ride. We'll see you next time.